Welcome back to the bakery. I am your host, EncyclopÆdia Bright, a beacon of light in a dark night. And as a chief baker, I'm back with another hot slice. If you've ever been on social media for longer than a day or two, you're probably used to seeing an abundance of inaccurate statements. A lot of things that float around that just aren't true. Now, maybe they're partially true, or maybe they're wholly false. But we see these sort of things all the time. I want to talk about one of those things. It comes in like an indirect format. Comes in the form of like a disingenuous question. So one that I see on social media a lot is the question: how did Jesus find people named Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and Paul in the Middle East? Now, before I get started, this is not about religion. This is not about what you should or should not believe in terms of your personal life. This is strictly about the validity of the question about how Jesus would have been acquainted with people with those kinds of names 2,000 years ago in the Middle East, what it means and what it doesn't mean. So for somebody to ask a question like that, they're insinuating that the idea that the stories had to be made up because those are what we would consider English names. And a person would jump to that conclusion if they were not informed about etymology, the history of words. If you know about the etymology, the history of those words, those names in particular, you would know that they were common names for that time period and that area of the world. So what we're going to do today is talk about the names of Jesus and his apostles and some notable Bible writers as recorded in the Bible. So we're going to start with Jesus himself. The name Jesus comes from the Greek Iesous, Iesous. The original Hebrew term that it came from is Yahshua, which means Yahweh is salvation. And that's the root of the same English name Joshua. So if you've heard the name Joshua and you've heard the name Jesus, they come from the same root word, Yahshua, which again means Yahweh is salvation. So now we're going to go alphabetically and look at the names of the apostles and other notable people from that time period. There was an apostle named Andrew. Andrew comes from the Greek Andreas, which means manly or masculine or strong. There were two apostles named James. James comes from the Greek Iakobos or Jacob, which comes from the Hebrew Jacob also, and that originally means supplanter of the heel. This term is also the root of the English name Jacob. So if you've heard the name James and you've heard the name Jacob, just know that they both originally come from the Hebrew Jacob. Not only that, but Jacob became Iago in Romance languages. And that explains why the Epistle of James in the Bible, when you see it in a Spanish translated Bible, it'll say Santiago, which means Saint James. And just for fun, we can throw in the tidbit that San Diego comes from the same thing. So that's Diego, Tiago, James, and Jacob. They all come from the same Hebrew root, Jacob. Of course, we know there was an apostle named John. That comes from the Greek Ioannis, and that comes from the Hebrew Yehohanan, which means Yahweh has shown favor. Everybody knows there was an apostle named Judas. There were actually two of them. One was a little bit more popular than the other one for some specific reason. Now, Judas comes from the Greek Yaudas, which comes from the Hebrew Yehuda, more commonly pronounced Judah, and that means lauded. Iscariot comes from the Greek Iskariotes, and that is believed to mean man from Kirioth. So basically, this was a man whose name was Judah, but because the New Testament was translated into Greek, it became Judas, and the place in his last name Iscariot was really just a reference to where he was from. Now, there was a Bible writer named Luke who was not an apostle. Luke comes from the Greek Lucas, which is a contraction of Lucanus, and that's just that means of Lucania, so another reference to where somebody's from. Matthew is a shortened form of the Hebrew name Mattathiah, and that means gift of Yahweh. Matthew was also known as Levi, and Levi is a Hebrew term that means adjoined. Now, there's also an apostle named Nathaniel. That comes from Hebrew as well, and it means God has given. Bartholomew comes from the Greek Bartholomeus, which comes from the Aramaic Bar Talmai, and that simply means son of Talmai. And what about Philip? Philip comes from the Greek Philoppos, which just means lover of horses. Now, there was a Bible writer named Paul who was initially referred to as Saul. Saul is Hebrew, and it means asked of God, asked as in requested. He later changed his name to Paul, and Paul comes from the Greek Paulos, which means little or small. Now, Simon is the Greek form of Simeon, which comes from a Hebrew root that's related to hearing and listening. And Peter comes from the Greek Petros, which means rock. Cephas is the Semitic equivalent for rock. So Jesus had an apostle named Simon, and Jesus gave him the name Peter for his rock-like qualities. So that's where we get Simon, Simeon, Peter, and Cephas. Now, Thaddeus, or maybe Thaddeus in common pronunciation, comes from the Greek Thaddeus, which comes from the Hebrew Tadei, and that may mean large-hearted in the sense of courage. There was also an apostle named Thomas, and that comes from the Aramaic for twin. So now, if we go back and look at these in the context of first century Palestine, which is populated by people who spoke Aramaic, they spoke Greek, they spoke Hebrew, and they spoke Latin. These names would have been common. If you look in the book of John, the account of Jesus' execution, I want to say it's John chapter 19, you see that Pontius Pilate wrote a sign and put it on the stake that Jesus was nailed to. And it said something like, Jesus, the Nazarene, the King of the Jews. The scripture says that he wrote it in Hebrew, Latin, and Greek so that everybody who was walking by could read it. And just for fun, we're going to throw out two more. Adam and Eve. So Adam comes from the Hebrew word, which literally means man. When the woman was created and brought to Adam, it first says that he called her woman. I don't remember the Hebrew term for that, but it literally meant female man. But afterwards, I think it's in maybe Genesis chapter 4, or maybe at the end of Genesis chapter 3, it says that after this, he came to call her Eve because she was the mother of everything living. And so the Hebrew term there was like Chawa, which became like Kiva and eventually Eva, something like that. But that's where we get Adam and Eve from, because that term Chawa means mother. Mother or living, I can't remember now. I might have made a mistake there, but we can double check that. In fact, I'll leave it up to you. But the idea here is if you take all of those terms and now you search them, if you consider them in their original context, and you can even cross-reference them. You go on something like Facebook and type in a name like Adam, like Adham, or Kawa, Chawa. Type in a name like Mattathiah or something like that. And then type in, say, Lebanon or Jerusalem or Beirut, one of these areas in the Middle East, somewhere in, let's say, Jordan or something like that. And see if names of actual people come up. I've done that before. So that shows that the names, as we may know them, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Paul, Simon, they may seem English to us because we've received them through English translation. But I mean, what if we spoke Spanish? Mateo, So that's just something to kind of wrap your mind around and be on the lookout for. When people ask questions because they're trying to allude to a conspiracy theory, sometimes they just don't know what they're talking about because they don't know enough. Which is unfortunate, but there's always room to learn. So hopefully we can help people learn instead of berating them. Although I do believe that sometimes people just need to be berated. But that's a different subject for a different day. That's what I wanted to tell you guys about. Hopefully we can do this a little bit more frequently. But that's all the time I have. You guys be safe. Break bread.